My name is John C. Calhoun. I'm a senator from the great state of South Carolina. I was born on March 18th, 1782, at a time when our country had lived for years. Once Congress made its request, or requisition, it was up to the legislatures of the states to levy the tax. The point I am making is that Congress, under the Articles, had no powers to levy a direct tax upon the people of the several states. Its only power was to request that the state legislature lay and levy the tax. It would then be up to the several state legislatures to directly tax their own residents and to forward all the revenues raised to the federal treasury. Under such a system, income redistribution was impossible. If Virginia felt its citizens were being taxed to enrich the citizens of Massachusetts, the Virginia legislature would simply refuse to levy the tax. My career in Washington. In American history books, I will be best remembered for the years that I spent in the United States Senate. So I mentioned the time I spent in the Senate first, even though my career in Washington began some 21 years before I became a U.S. Senator. I was first appointed to the U.S. Senate by the legislature of South Carolina in 1832. I served in the Senate for the next 11 years, until I retired in March of 1843 to position myself to seek the presidency of the United States. When that didn't work out, the South Carolina legislature in November of 1845 returned me to the U.S. Senate. Some of you may be asking, how was it that I was appointed to the Senate by the South Carolina legislature? I might remind all of you that it will only be in 1913, after the enactment of the 17th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, that senators will be directly elected by the people. And that 17th Amendment was another mistake in my humble opinion. For my 16 years in the Senate, 107 years from now, in 1957, a distinguished committee of that body will name me as one of our nation's 5 greatest senators, notwithstanding my consistent attempts to demonstrate that Southern slavery was a positive good for both the South and the Negro. My nationalist years. What most of you probably don't know is that my political career in the nation's capital began some 21 years before I was appointed to the Senate. I first came to Washington on March 4th, 1811, at the age of 29, to take my seat in the House of Representatives. I served there for the next 6 years. By the way, as you listen to me today, take notice of how almost everything important in my life, from birth to death, happened in March. Almost immediately upon entering the House, I joined with Speaker of the House, Henry Clay, and others in a group which came to be known as the War Hawks, owing to our insistence on war with England. From the first, the War of 1812 went badly, especially in the New England states. There, the war was terribly unpopular, owing to the disruption of their trade with England. Indeed, it was so unpopular that delegates from 3 New England states convoked the Hartford Convention, which called for New England to secede from the Union. From that time on, I became aware of the danger of disunion and secession. For that reason, in the years immediately following the war, my primary intent was to bind the American people from all sections of the country into one nation, a nation that could withstand threats from abroad and from within. I wanted no more secessionist movements. To that end, I joined with Speaker of the House Henry Clay and what he christened his American system. The American system called for a protective tariff. First, to ensure profitable home markets for American manufacturers. And second, to finance internal improvements. It was my belief that a system of roads and canals would appeal to the self-interest of farmers desirous of moving their produce to market, as well as to merchants engaged in commerce, and would bind them all to the national government. At that time, I argued, and I quote, "We are greatly and rapidly growing. This is our pride, our danger, our weakness, and our strength. Let us then bond the Republic together with a perfect system of roads and canals. Protection would make all parts adhere more closely. It would be a new and powerful Smith. To finance the internal improvements that the American system called for, we in Congress passed the Tariff of 1816. In the years and experiences that followed, I slowly but surely began to rethink my nationalist beliefs. Eventually, I would come to view the tariff as pernicious income redistribution. Now, on its face, the Tariff of 1816 was entirely fair. It had to be, because Article 1, Section 8 of the new Constitution required that duties and imposts be uniform throughout the United States. But what I and many of my Southern friends had not contemplated was that the political teachings of Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, still found great acceptance in the halls of Congress, though Hamilton had been dead since 1804. The Hamilton teachings that I refer to were those expressed in his 1801 Report on Manufactures to the House of Representatives. But my misgivings materialized only later. During my 6 years in the House, I was generally regarded as one of our nation's leading nationalists. Then in 1817, in October, I left the House when President James Monroe named me as his Secretary of War. I held that office for the next 8 years until March 4th, 1825. As Secretary of War, I continued to advance the same nationalist philosophy that I had held while in the House. As Secretary of War, I worked tirelessly to ensure that the problems that had hamstrung our country during the War of 1812 would not repeat themselves in the event of a future war. My first priority was to build an effective Navy. That included the new steam frigates. My second goal was to create a standing army of adequate size. For that purpose, I proposed an expandable army, similar to France under Napoleon Bonaparte, whereby a basic cadre of 6,000 officers and men could quickly be expanded to an army of 11,000. And because our army must be able to get to the point of battle, I advocated a great system of permanent roads, canals, and improvements to river navigation, which neatly dovetail with my earlier congressional espousal of the American system. Finally, because the War of 1812 conclusively showed that we needed reliable sources of materiel, I called for financial encouragements to America's newborn manufacturing industries. That is a protective tariff that would protect our nascent industries from their English competitors. It was said by many during this period that the word nation was always on my lips. Indeed, my conscious aim was to enhance national unity, which I identified with national power. My 8 years as vice president, I left the War Department in March of 1825 when I was elected vice president under John Quincy Adams. It was during that 4-year period that I seriously began to re-examine my nationalist beliefs. It was during that period that I first came to understand the dangers of income redistribution. Now, although the tariff was uniformly collected throughout the United States, many of us in the South belatedly awoke to discover that the tariff only benefited the northern manufacturing interests. Manufacturing simply hadn't taken hold in the South in any significant way, perhaps owing to the fact that ours was an agricultural system based upon slavery. Gradually, we came to believe that the South was being harmed in 2 ways. First, here's an example. If English manufacturers could manufacture muskets and turn an acceptable profit by selling them in America at $20 per weapon, and if New England manufacturers needed to sell comparable muskets, which they manufactured at a price of $24 to make a profit, then a tariff of $4 per musket would be sufficient to level the playing field. At the same time, a 50% tariff was likely to drive British muskets entirely out of the American market and to ensure that Americans would buy American-made muskets over English muskets of the same quality. The effect of the tariff was, therefore, to force the South and the West to pay higher prices for all manufactured goods subject to the tariff, whether of American or British manufacture. The only beneficiaries of the tariff, therefore, were the northern manufacturers, who could now increase their sales even while increasing their prices, and yet still undersell their British competitors. But the South was harmed in a second, more direct and more unforeseen way. Because the British were less able to sell their manufactures in the American market, British industrialists had less money to buy cotton, and to buy cotton from the South. Accordingly, the British demand for American cotton decreased. This lack of demand additionally caused Southern cotton prices to plummet.